Okay, my droogies, my friends, my animales, mis amigos, everybody who might be out there, anybody out there who might be within the reach of the internet, I send you my greetings. You could probably guess who I am, even though the spelling of the name isn't quite accurate there. It is I, Malcolm Tent. That's actually M-A-L-C-O-L-M-T-E-N-T. P.O. Box 3626, Newtown, Connecticut, 06470. And you probably know the drill by now, kids. You see the address. You hear my voice. You can see the clock. You can read a calendar. You know. It is proven beyond any reasonable doubt that it is I, Malcolm Tent, and that I am here with this week's episode of Tent Talks Tunes, baby. Yeah. Greetings, everybody. Nice to see all you folks who have tuned in and are turning on and getting ready to drop out of your collective minds with me, your host, Malcolm Tent, coming to you live from the Bon Air Chicken Farm in the wonderful environs of Greater Danbury, Connecticut. Hello! We got Murray Gelman tuned in from Tucson, Arizona. We got Mike Lesser from Vancouver, British Columbia and Canada. We got Adam Wolf, a.k.a. KD, of the great KD After Dark program on YouTube, which you should look up. KD After Dark, people. He's got a badass t-shirt, too. We got John Farrell, who says, and I quote, "I am so overdue to send you a pile of cash." Yes, John Farrell, you are correct. You're very overdue. You really need to get on that. I really would appreciate that. John Farrell and I go back a long, long way. We are well acquainted in the art of fair trade and fair exchange of cash for goods. One can definitely assign a par value for goods in exchange for cash. Think about it. So sort of take that to heart, John Farrell. You don't have to just send me a pile of cash. You know, a pile doesn't have to be a big pile. It can be a short stack. A little goes a long way in my household. For those of you who are so inclined, here's my mailing address. Once again, with the notation, cold hard cash. P.O. Box 3626, Newtown, Connecticut, 06470. 10s, 20s, singles, 5s. I'm cool with that. You can take some rolls of quarters and throw them in a shoebox. Tie up the shoebox, wrap it securely. Send it to P.O. Box 3626, Newtown, Connecticut, 06470. PayPal, mt@malcolmtent.net. That's the right spelling of my name, by the way. Brother Jim Smith is in the house. Jim and I are working on a very interesting project that will be theoretically coming out sooner or later on my label, TPOS. I'm not going to tell you exactly what or by whom, but I can guarantee you it's going to polarize everybody. Y'all going to love it or hate it. Maybe both. I don't know. We'll have to see. That's kind of the specialty of my label, doing various weirdo, degenerate outsider music. I'll let that be a clue for you. Yes, a clue. And anyway, to get back to the cash issue, everybody knows that I'm all about the exchange of goods. And in fact, I want to thank everybody last night. Take two. I want to thank everybody who tuned into Tent Talks Tunes last week when I took a trawl through the Trash American style inventory and talked about some really cool vintage and semi-vintage pressings of records by The Who. Response was great. I ended up selling every Verschlungener record that I showed, plus a couple that I had in inventory. So that was really cool. I want to thank you guys for participating in that. Excuse me. As I'm sure you know, I make my living by selling records, by being a rock star and running a label. It is a hobby for sure, but it's how I pay my bills. So all you folks last week who bought records by The Who from the personal Trash American Style inventory, thank you. The shows that I do where I put stuff for sale go really well. People really dial into those and seem to like them. I noticed I had about twice as many viewers last week as I typically do when I'm not selling stuff. So I think that's an indicator of a direction I can go with Tent Talks Tunes. The problem is, some days I wake up in the morning and I don't want to talk about things that I have for sale. You know, I have my own record collection, and I just think of things as I see them. When I'm leafing through my records, I just think, well, this would be really cool to talk about that and this, but I'm not going to sell these things. So we're kind of looking for a healthy medium where I can talk about a lot of stuff and make people happy by selling a few things. And actually today I kind of have that approach. There are some records that I found in my personal collection that had really cool stories behind them. And in telling those stories, we can talk about a few things that I do have for sale. So I'm a Libra. Maybe we got some balance there. Let's hoist our jug of Danbury tap water and drink a toast to balance, or balance if you prefer. Before we get too deep into it, let's do our usual checks of the bulletin board and the calendar and the mailbox. Today, the bulletin board and the calendar are one and the same because I have genuine, honest-to-gosh, old-fashioned flyers here for two events coming up in the very near future. In fact, I'm hitting the road tomorrow to drive down to North Carolina so that I can begin practicing with the almighty anti-scene for 2 gigs that we've got coming up very soon, March 31st in Spartanburg, South Carolina, at the Ground Zero. It is the aforementioned anti-scene, and Wednesday 13, anti-scene compadres from way back, plus Blackwater Rising and the Black River Rebels. So Spartanburg, I'm telling y'all, that's the place to be. If you've never seen Anti-Scene live in person, you need to remedy that situation because you are missing out. I say that not only as the Anti-Scene bass player, but as a fan of the group since the summer of 1984. That's a long time to mark out. And I do my best marking out when I'm on the stage with those guys. And of course, Wednesday 13 is going to be Dynamite. In case you miss it, that's all right. The next night in Wilmington, North Carolina at Reggie's, it is the almighty Anti-Scene with our good friends KIF, which stands for Knowledge is for Fools, one of the best band names I've ever heard, and our good pals, the Street Clones. That is a real triple threat right there at Reggie's in Wilmington on April 1st. Don't be a fool. Be there on April 1st. That's the calendar. That's the bulletin board. Let's check the mailbox. We've talked a lot about my love of print. For example, print flyers. Print flyers. I love print flyers. I also love print zines. And I never, ever, ever get tired of the fact that the Bridge and Tunnel Crowd are an active print zine based in New Haven, Connecticut. They've got a wild and wacky aesthetic, totally unique perspective, very, very sly humor, and I got my issue in the mail today, and I've already perused it from cover to cover. Love it. Check out the Bridge and Tunnel Crowd. If I like it, the odds are at least 50-50 that you'll like it too. Mike Lesser out there in Vancouver, BC says that he is hoisting a cup of Tim Horton Java. Someone's got to tell me who Tim Horton is. I don't know who Tim Horton is, but in my travels across Canada, I've noticed that Tim Horton appears to own probably 75% of the entire country. There are more Tim Horton restaurants per capita than even Dunkin' Donuts per capita here in the States. Who is Tim Horton? What's so good about his coffee? And how is it that he owns 75% of Canada? Somebody, please clue me in. Mike, you're there. Tell me about it. My inquiring mind wants to know. Let's see, what else did we get in the mail? We got a couple of boxes in the mail. A happy mailbox is a full mailbox, and vice versa. I got a pretty cool box from my main man, Josh Kelly, who's got a great label called Ruined Records. Ruined Records has got a brand new release. I haven't heard this yet, but I'm pretty excited about it. Apparently, Josh Kelly himself was in this band called Yokozuna. Previously unknown, unheard, rabid hardcore from 1997. In NC. I do believe in Wilmington, actually. Yes, indeed. Roanoke, Virginia. I stand corrected. Roanoke, Virginia. 1997. So, I'm excited to check this out. You know me and my colored vinyl. I love my colored vinyl. Just love it. Love it, love it, love it. So this record's got a pretty interesting pedigree. You know, anything that is unreleased and or rare from the dim, distant past automatically piques my interest. So I'm going to check this out. And thank you, Josh. Josh also moderates the obsolete and, I forget the exact name, the obsolete and rare currency collectors group on Facebook. If you're like me and you're a long-time coin collector and collector of old banknotes, check out the obsolete currency group on Facebook. I spend a lot of time there. Just looking. So much fun to look at that stuff. Got another box in the mail from my good pal Callie out in California. Callie knows what I like. By the way, hello Nick Sampson, who's tuned in right now. John Adam. Hello, John Adam. Callie from California knows what I like. He knows that I love 8 tracks. 8 tracks, baby. Sealed 8 tracks. Sealed blank 8 tracks, which I will be using on my label, TPOS. Check out the graphics on that. The 8-ball cartridge cleaner. Really wonderful 70s graphics. Why you would name a cartridge cleaner an 8-ball, I have no idea, but I'm just glad they did. That's a keeper. That's going to go on display in my personal museum. 8 tracks. Guess what? Reel-to-reel tapes. Oh, man. Something else that I will be repurposing for sure on my label TPOS, because I am just a fool for weird formats, especially when they're tape. I'm kind of bummed because my trusty old TAC reel-to-reel tape recorder is putting out lots of hideous static, and when I try to record a reel-to-reel tape, this awful staticky noise ends up on all of my tapes. Some kind of output capacitor or something is fried, I don't know. I've tried cleaning the potentiometers, it doesn't work. So if anybody out there knows anything about old tape recorder repair, please let me know. Help a brother out. And by the way, Callie, yes, they arrived safely, as you can see, and I've already put something in the mail to you in exchange, because I love trading stuff, and you, Callie, have got something coming to you very soon. So thank you for the tapes. Really appreciate it. They'll be put to good use. Toast! All right. Now that we're all up to date, and now that we know where we all stand, let's talk tunes. So, people have asked me on a number of occasions. They say, Malcolm Tent, how many records do you have? The answer, which I've stated before, but it's worth stating again, is probably not as many as you would think I do. I'm not one of those people who has like thousands and thousands of albums. I live in a very small house, which is quite fortunate because there's literally only so much room I have here to put things, you know, and records take up a lot of room. So I really am very limited in the amount of space I have, and thus the number of records that I can have laying around the house. Inventory is another story entirely. Those are all stored off-site, and there's plenty of room over there. But as far as what I can have in the house, just for my own personal enjoyment, not that many. But I was playing a record fairly recently, and it's a record that I only discovered within the last few years. It's a record that I had seen quite often at record shows. And this record is so ubiquitous at record shows and swap meets and used record stores, I always just kind of assumed that maybe it wasn't that great. Never paid that much attention to it until finally I bought a record collection from somebody, and this record was in there. And I said, what the heck? Let's give it a spin. Change my name to Ritz and call me a cracker if it wasn't a damn good record. A real good record. And I'm talking about this one right here. Captain Beyond. Maybe you people out there have seen it with its super fancy lenticular cover. I don't know if the 3D lenticular cover effect is coming through, but that is a textured 3D piece of art. And kind of gimmicky, but it's a really good record. And it really piqued my interest. Like, who made this really good record? And this is when we get into the meat of the matter here for Tent Talks Tunes. What did I find out about this record? Where did I find out the information? In the old-fashioned way, baby. Before there were home computers and before there were internets, there were, on the back of record covers quite often, liner notes. I turned the record over and I read the liner notes. Let's read the liner notes, shall we? So it's like, okay, besides the song titles, which are all very cool song titles, you got one called Dancing Madly Backwards on a Sea of Air. Armworth, Myopic Void, Mesmerization Eclipse, Raging River of Fear. That's just side one. Those are some very, very evocative song titles. But then we've got the personnel. Personnel is Rod Evans on lead vocals, Bobby Caldwell on drums and percussion, Rhino on lead guitar, Lee Dorman on bass guitar. Well, what do you know? This is an all-star band. From what year, according to the liner notes? Did they put a year on it? 1972. An all-star album from 1972. So, okay, who are the all-stars? Well, first of all, you got Rod Evans. Rod Evans was the original lead singer for a band called Deep Purple. Before there was Ian Gillan, before there was David Coverdale, there was Rod Evans. So Rod Evans is one of these very hairy mod fellows that you can see on the back. All right, so right off the bat, you're starting with the original lead singer of Deep Purple. Next up, you got Bobby Caldwell. Now, I'm not 100% sure if this is the same Bobby Caldwell. I'm kind of embarrassed by this, but I believe, because remember, we're in the age of liner notes, not computers. I'm still not the type of guy who immediately goes to Google when he's presented with some information that he doesn't know. I like to ponder these things and puzzle them out. Or maybe not just know. I don't know. But Bobby Caldwell, I'm assuming, is the same guy from Flint, Michigan, who was involved in various bands like with Dick Wagner and Terry Knight, bands like The Pack and The Bossmen, and probably a million others. Assuming it's the same guy. Maybe somebody out there who is internet savvy can clue us into that. Anyway, so you've got one Deep Purple lead singer for sure, quite possibly somebody who was in the Michigan garage band scene for many years, a dude named Rhino, who was in one of the latter versions of Iron Butterfly, and a dude named Lee Dorman, who was in the original Iron Butterfly. So hot dog and hot damn, you've got a Deep Purple, Iron Butterfly, and maybe Michigan supergroup. Which makes the fact that this album is really, really good. It's like heavy, kind of proto-metal, sort of boogie rock. Just full throttle, full bore rock music from the 1970s played by all these heavy dudes. Really cool, and it's got some very cool artwork. So, the original Deep Purple, which is represented, by the way, by a couple of albums that, yes, I do have for sale. This is a repress of Shades of Deep Purple. It's on some kind of wacky colored vinyl, I'm not exactly sure. Sealed original. And I also have an OG 100% bona fide original Deep Purple album, self-titled, with the gatefold sleeve on the original Tetragrammaton label. This record has been pressed, repressed, counterfeited, bootlegged, reissued, I don't even know how many times. This sealed copy is one of those represses. This is original. Tetragrammaton was a label co-founded by Bill Cosby way back when, early 70s apparently, and its distribution for a long time was by Gulf and Western Corporation. I believe this one has Warner Brothers distribution on it. Nope, this is also Gulf and Western. And because of that, and many other factors, Tetragrammaton and its catalog just kind of got lost into an abyss of weird contracts, expired copyrights, gray areas, unenforced trademarks. Who even knows what the status of Tetragrammaton is anymore? Which is why these represses are so common. But this is original, baby. Original. Rod Evans on lead vocals, Nicky Simper on bass, and then, of course, the power triumvirate of Ritchie Blackmore, Ian Pace, and John Lord on guitar, drums, and organ, respectively. Very interesting proto version of Deep Purple. It's not quite as heavy as the stuff they would do later. It's got a much more of a 60s feel to it, but still pretty good. The only quibble I would conceivably have is that Rod Evans doesn't have the same vocal gymnastics on display as someone like Ian Gillan. I think he's more in the style of David Coverdale, not as bluesy and gravelly, but with kind of the same range, if you know what I mean. Good stuff. And Rod Evans' performances on the Captain Beyond album are so good. And the music is so good. There's not one bad song on this record. That's why it's in my personal collection, and I love talking about it. Now, just in case you guys are going to get bummed that the only records I'm offering for sale are by Deep Purple, oh, and by the way, Iron Butterfly, what would a record store be without some Iron Butterfly records? Of course, for sale, what I got here is a second pressing, In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida. Sorry, this is not the second pressing. This is the modern repressing on the very short-lived 80s style Atco label. This is technically probably the rarest version of In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida because it's from the 80s. And just by sheer dint of it being the 80s, they didn't press as many of these. What's interesting about this is, besides the modern Atco label, of which this being the only example I've ever seen on an Iron Butterfly record, it still has the original heavy-duty cardboard tip-on sleeve. I don't know why that is, because typically record labels would print up new jackets and update them for the current marketplace, but they kept the original hard cardboard tip-on sleeves, just as it was with these, the second pressings of In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida, which had the very common yellow Atco label. This is the one you're most likely going to see because this album sold, who even knows how many hundreds of thousands, if not millions. This is the common label. There was a first pressing version of this that had the old sort of blue, sort of yellow Atco label. Those are kind of hard to find too. But this record blew my mind when I was a kid. I remember when I was younger, growing up in Hialeah, Florida, I had a next-door neighbor my age. His name was Frankie. And Frankie had an uncle named Henry. And Uncle Henry was, as far as I could tell, a hippie. I doubt that he actually was. but he was probably in his early 20s, and he had kind of longish hair. And in his bedroom, he had, like, you know, black light posters and peace signs. And I remember the day that he installed a waterbed in the place. This was like real sophisticated hippie stuff for a, like, you know, 7-8-year-old kid in unincorporated Northwest Dade County. And In-A-Gadda-Da Vida was one of those records that was in his record collection. And I remember I'd go next door to hang out with Frankie. We would play this record a lot. And, you know, In-A-Gadda-Da Vida, baby, don't you know that I want you? Man, left quite an impression on this young lad. I love this album. Love this album. And, of course, I've got my own copy in the personal collection, which is a first pressing, by the way. But if you all are interested in the common, yet still highly desirable second pressing, or the somewhat uncommon and not widely distributed 80s version, let me know. I got them for sale. I also have the less common later pressing of the Captain Beyond record I'm talking about. First pressing has got the lenticular cover with that back cover. Repressing's got a version of the artwork on the front and a completely different back cover. And quite frankly, I'm not particularly partial to either one. This is rarer, by the way. The lenticular cover sold more. The first pressing sold a lot more than the second pressing. So technically, this is the rarest version. I'm not really married to either one specifically, so if anybody does want to buy a Captain Beyond record, your choice. I'm willing to part with either, but only one. One's for sale. The other one is going back into my personal collection. So if you're interested in any of these, message me. Send me a personal message. My rule is always the same. First come, first served. If you comment, I won't necessarily see it. But if you message me, I will see it, and the messages come in strict chronological order, so I can hook you up that way. So yeah, man. Rod Evans, from Deep Purple to Captain Beyond, into a career in the medical business. And then this is where the story gets extremely hairy when it comes to Rod Evans. And this is what makes the record business so fascinating. Because the record business is as sleazy, it's almost as sleazy as government. Maybe even more so. I'm sure it comes pretty close. Rod Evans was in the medical business for a number of years in California until one day somebody made him an offer that he should have refused. Rod Evans got an offer that he really should have refused. He was offered a chance to front a new version of Deep Purple. And the way that that story went and the way that it ended is just so completely twisted and ridiculous and indicative of the absolutely sordid, sleazy nature of the record business that I'm not going to try to go into the entire story. You really got to look it up. All you got to do is look up Fake Deep Purple. Just those three simple words. Fake Deep Purple. And the rabbit hole, which began with the liner notes to this album and led us to Deep Purple and to Iron Butterfly, will eventually lead you to Fake Deep Purple. And if you're as much of a sucker for strange rock and roll history as I am, you're going to love the saga of Fake Deep Purple and the way that it connects to fake Steppenwolf and a fake Traffic. I mean, it's completely nuts. So that's what you do, man. You follow the strange tunnels in the rabbit hole from here to there to over there to wherever it might lead you. Here, Tent Talks Tunes. God, what a fun business we live in. All right. So them's the liner notes for one record. Here's the liner notes for another record. This is one of those records that I came across when I still had my brick and mortar record store, Trash American style. And as I mentioned earlier, my stock in trade, besides having a label and playing in bands, is buying and selling records. So especially when I was at the brick and mortar record store, record collections would come in all the time. Like almost every day, records would walk in the door and I'd buy them. And there's this one dude, kind of towards the end of our run before the landlord tossed us out. This one dude came in and he was a genuine, honest-to-gosh hippie. A real-life 60s hippie. Not like my next-door neighbor's Uncle Henry. This guy was a real hippie. And he was selling records, and he had a bunch of his original records from the hippie days of yore, including this one that just caught my eye. Just totally caught my eye, caught my fancy, made me want to hear it. Because, quite frankly, it looked ridiculous. It looked utterly silly. And that's one of the first things that I zero in on when I see a record. If it looks really nuts, or wacky, or silly, or even just downright dumb, I glom onto it. I want it. I grab it. And in this case, I wanted it, I glommed onto it, and I grabbed it. What record was it? What record had the perfect combination of silly name and quite dated period graphics combined with a silly theme? Why, it's this record here by a group called Giant Crab. The album called A Giant Crab Comes Forth. It's got a planet, it's got clouds, it's got a crab with a peace sign in the middle of it. The group is called Giant Crab. I mean, come on, what's not to love about this, dude? It's got another great big crab on the back with an ocean. I knew I had to have it. So I bought the collection from the dude, and as was my prerogative, I took the record and took it home, dropped the needle in the groove. Songs such as Intensify Your Soul, Groovy Town, I Enjoy Being the Boy, and then some other song titles, you know, like Directions, it started with a little kiss, Watch Your Step, whatever. But dropped the needle in the groove, the music started coming out. I was blown away by how good it was. What a fantastic, tasty combination of James Brown-style horn charts, wicked fuzz guitar, and kind of like post-psychedelic 60s hard rock songwriting and production with soulful vocals. It's ridiculous. This record kicks butt. It's so good. You would never dream that a record called Giant Crab could be this good. So, obviously, I had to know more. Had to learn more. So, started reading the liner notes. And let's see, produced by Bill Holmes, don't know who that is. Arrangements by Ernie Orozco and Raymond Orozco, don't know who they are. Arrangements by Giant Crab. Engineered by Paul Buff. Paul Buff. Now hold on a second. Paul Buff. That is a name that immediately leapt out at me. And just to confirm that it was indeed the same Paul Buff, yeah, by all indications, these guys are from California. Therefore, it had to have been the same Paul Buff who had a recording studio in Cucamonga, California in the early 60s, who took on an apprentice named Frank Zappa. Had to be the same Paul Buff. Anybody who's familiar with the Frank Zappa story will know that Frank Zappa was basically taken under Paul Buff's wing, and Paul Buff taught Frank Zappa how to run a recording studio, how to engineer sessions, how to spool tape, how to do all this stuff. And Zappa was also used as a session musician and staff writer for Paul Buff's productions, most of which he licensed to a label called Original Sound Music. And Original Sound was a California label that put out a ton of records. Lots and lots of records. Scored quite a few regional hits. Put out lots and lots of novelty records. And even though Zappa's not on all of them, he's on quite a few of them. And the first one that I ever saw was this record here by the Penguins. The great doo-wop band from the 50s, the Penguins. A song called Memories of El Monte. And sure enough, I don't know if I can zoom in close enough to get this without freaking out my phone, but hopefully you can see the label credits, which do read Frank Zappa, what does it read exactly? Zappa and Collins. And it might be a little bit blurry. The focus on this thing is not the best, but Zappa and Collins. Well, there's only one Zappa, and as y'all may know, Frank Zappa ran with a guy named Ray Collins, who is a California R&B singer, and they ended up forming a band called, well, in case you were wondering, a band called The Mothers, who of course put out great albums like Freak Out, Absolutely Free, Cruising with Ruben and the Jets, and even a weird unauthorized compilation album called The Worst of the Mothers. That was put together by MGM Records. And as far as I'm concerned, those first 4 Mothers records that I just named, also including We're Only In It for the Money, these records, 2 of which are here, and one of which is an anthology of them, is like a pinnacle of modern music. And that's Frank Zappa, and that's Ray Collins. And Frank Zappa learned how to make records like this by studying with Paul Buff, who engineered the Giant Crab record. Reading liner notes is fun, because one thing leads to another. One thing, yeah, you learn a lot from these things. Oh, by the way, these Mothers records are for sale. If you want to buy one, talk to me. Leave me a personal message. Leave me a message. We'll talk about getting you these records. Now these, the majority of these are not for sale. These are like original pressings of these original sound records are really hard to find. Here's a great one by a group called the Rotations Heavies. It's a surf instrumental. I believe Zappa plays drums on that one. He plays something on it. Great, great surf instrumental. And this is an original pressing on Original Sound with an original Sound company sleeve. And I'm sure if you guys have been to a record swap or a used record store, you've probably seen one of these oldies but goodies anthology records. There's millions of them. Those are on Original Sound. That's Paul Buff. And thus a tenuous connection, at least to Frank Zappa. According to my liner notes that I wrote on the bag, both of these sides of the record have Frank Zappa on them. Here's another Frank Zappa production. Grunion Run by the Persuaders. The B-side being called Tijuana Surf. Grunion Run has an absolutely classic Frank Zappa guitar solo on it. When you hear the guitar solo on this, you cannot mistake it for anybody other than Frank Zappa. And did Paul Buff write that? No, Zappa wrote it. He's got a full-blown songwriting credit on the A-side, if you can read it. Hopefully you can. And Paul Buff gets the credit on the B-side. All created in the deserts of Southern California in Cucamonga. These are all from the personal collection, except for one. I do have a spare copy of Agua Caliente, backed with Drums A Go-Go. on the original sound label, an older vintage pressing. If you want this one is up for grabs. It is for sale. I keep my prices reasonable. Message me and let me know if you're a Zappa completist. I don't know what Zappa's connection is with this one, but it's a great, great instrumental track. I guess drum-based instrumentals are very popular for a while, with lots of reverb all over them. And this is one of them. Really cool riff. That one's for sale. The others are not. So you got the Paul Buff, Frank Zappa, Ray Collins connection, and I learned somewhere along the line that Giant Crab had made a second album, and so I really made it my business to find a copy of that second album. First album is hard enough to find. Just a bit of background, it was on the Uni label, best known for Neil Diamond and some of the earlier Elton John records. But Uni also put out some really cool rock records. Some of the aforementioned like post-psychedelic hard rock. There's a great band called the Yellow Pages on Uni. Choice stuff. And 2 Giant Crab records. So it took me many, many years digging through lots and lots of used record bins and flea market boxes until finally I was at a flea market digging. It was somewhere around 7:30 in the morning. It was dusty and hot, and I don't get up at 7:30 in the morning for anything except the flea market. And wouldn't you know it, I found the magic box, the second Giant Crab record, called Cool It, Helios. I immediately put my money where my mouth was. I threw down a $1 bill and walked away, rightfully so, with my copy of the second Giant Crab record. Eagerly got home and put it on and found out, somewhat to my dismay, and I'm going to scroll back, somebody commented earlier when talking about Captain Beyond, about how the second Captain Beyond record is not as good as the first, and it definitely isn't. Well, guess what? If it ain't just a true fact that the second Giant Crab record is not anywhere near as good as the first. It is completely like a disemboweled version of the first Giant Crab record. The first Giant Crab record, as I mentioned before, punchy horns, wicked fuzz guitar, sharp, bright production, soulful vocals, up-tempo. This one is pretty much a by-the-numbers, assembly line, by-the-book, late 60s pop product. And one would ask, how could you go from one extreme to the other? How could the first album be so good and the second album be so bland? Let's study the liner notes and see what we can find. Well, the liner notes aren't nearly as comprehensive on the second one as the first, but one thing I did notice, first of all, is that Ernie Orozco, who wrote most of the material on the first album, has not one single songwriting credit on the second album. That's a big clue right there, kids. Ernie Orozco wrote most of the first one. He wrote none of the second one. Also on the first album, Ernie Orozco gets a very pointed credit as band leader. On this one, all he gets is a couple of acknowledgments for vocal arrangements and musical arrangements. So some kind of political maneuvering occurred between the 2 Giant Crab records to take the guy who made the first album so good and just completely edge him out of the picture. Sounds like a different vocalist on this record even. I don't know. So whatever the deal was, probably an effort to try to sell more records with the second one than the first one, it didn't work. Because same deal as Captain Beyond, the second record is harder to find than the first, and it's not nearly as good. So yet another example of the sleazy, slimy, slippery, slick machinations of the record business. They are perfectly happy to take a winning formula and tear the guts out of it and sell fewer records the second time around than they did the first. And all we can do is roll our eyes and shrug our shoulders. But I gotta tell you, it's a lot of fun putting the pieces of the puzzle together by reading the liner notes. So more evidence of the superiority of vinyl, and it just cements my love for the format even more. I love that physical media, baby, because in my mind, this is the way to find out information and tell the tales of the tunes and share it with all of you out there, my frantic fans, my loyal listeners, and my vibrational viewers. That's what I got for today, folks. I want to thank you all for tuning in and turning on and dropping into some music reality with me, Malcolm Tent. I'm going to be hitting the road tomorrow, so I doubt very much that I'm going to be on the air next week. I will most likely be at rehearsal with the almighty Anti-Scene. I will have the Thunder Lumber strapped on and hanging around my neck, cranked up really effing loud, which is the way I like it. I like to play my bass loud enough to where if there's an object on top of the bass amplifier, it vibrates right off. That's the effect I like to have. So no Tent Talks tunes next week, but I will be back on the air the week after, Lord willing and the creeks don't rise. If you need to have some Tent Talks tunes in the interim, please go to my YouTube channel. It's just Malcolm Tent. Subscribe to it. Live it. Love it. Check it out. You can go to my website, malcolmtent.net, which is a total clearinghouse of information about moi. And you can pretend that it's Tent Talks tunes until I get back on the air next week after next. And that's it. I'm out of here. I do believe that I'll be back in 365 hours, approximately. Until we meet again, this is indeed Malcolm Tent saying so long from the Nutmeg State.